Good afternoon and welcome to Disgusting Tory Liars, an occasional feature which I fear I'm going to be running all too frequently in the next few months and years. But on a happier note, it was in early June 1963 that the Beatles hit the top spot, doubly their first number one album, their first number one single for some weeks together. And it was in this period that the greatest decade in the history of mankind got gloriously into its stride. What's the 60s history is a question I've been chewing over. I was there briefly, I was squeezed in at the end, and reliable sources have it that I was gurgling with particular appreciation at the sound of Get Back and Honky Tonk Women. Was it history? This is a question I've been turning over as researching a new history of disgust. And in terms of history in Britain, many historians would argue that there were only really 2 decades of genuine hope, meritocracy, and progress in Britain. And these were the 50s and 60s. To be precise, they were the 1650s when Cromwell ran the country after cutting off the head of Charles I, and the 1960s. One of the things I've been particularly interested in for the book is the wonderful clash of cultures between the old guard and the new guard, between the toffs and the dirty working classes, which took the form often of trials. The elite could go to Eton, Oxford, sit in Parliament, the House of Lords, be millionaires and the rest of it, but increasingly they could not control what was going on in their heads of their sons and daughters, or indeed even stop their daughter getting over the wall of Cheltenham Ladies' College to meet Brian Jones. What a wonderful night that must have been. So what did they do? In this state of disarray, they made clumsy, ham-fisted, illegitimate attempts, now look like a black comedy to us, to use the law against these dirty oiks with their nasty guitars. So, first off, actually, we have literature rather than music. Lady Chatterley trial. My old lecturer Rory McTurk missed a tutorial at Cambridge when Helen Gardner attended that trial. And he let slip to us that Gardner was rather relieved the prosecution didn't seem to have noticed the passage describing anal sex, which might have hammered the nail into that book for the foreseeable future. In fact, it slipped through and they won the trial. We were left with the wonderful gem from the pompous ass of a prosecuting QC asking the jury if they would be happy to have even their wife or servants read this disgusting filth. Later we had the trial of Jagger and Richards, an incredible establishment setup. We'll be talking about in more detail later on. But let's bear in mind that if it wasn't for a more honourable Rees-Mogg of that period, Keith Richards could have spent a year in jail on a setup for allowing people to smoke cannabis in his house. And before that, of course, and it was just this very month in 1963, with the Beatles on the ascendant, the Profumo affair was cracking into gear. Profumo had been found to have lied in Parliament. John Profumo, as you probably know, had an affair with Christine Keeler. It was argued he may have compromised national security. Profumo was a grand old establishment man, a bit of an oik by the standards of Rees-Mogg and Johnson, as he only went to Harrow, not Eton, but to Oxford. Was also a member of the Bullingdon Club, you'll be pleased to know. So, what have we got here? Well, we've got a man standing up in Parliament and lying. One of the old guard thinks he can get away with anything because of how he speaks and where he went to school. What have we got now? Well, many of us have just been watching PMQs with increasing astonishment today. Johnson stands up in a state of violent indignation at the leader of the opposition and insists that he's made a telephone call on an offer which Starmer is inquiring about. Starmer, with some patience and restraint, I have to say, in the circumstances, said that this call never occurred. Who do you believe? A man who was knighted as Director of Public Prosecutions, or a man who was sacked from his job for lying? We seem to be in an age now when Trump, when Johnson, when God knows what member of the government can stand up and use lies as an absolutely standard method of procedure. The first stupid lie that comes into their head with absolute conviction, as if the whole thing is now just a joke. So, was the 60s history? Yeah, I think it's passed into history. Paul McCartney said at one point, the 60s doesn't seem like a decade in the past to me. It seems like a decade in the future waiting to happen. I've often thought about this phrasing. But was the 60s history? Well, it was a period where if you stood up and lied in Parliament, you resigned. Let's keep that in mind. Thank you.